61.
Okay, 45 to 60.
61, yeah, 60 whatever.
Okay, you worked at Mesker Steel. What'd you do there?
As a draftsman, structural steel draftsman.
Did you know Charlie Wards? He works at International Steel. He was a draftsman.
No, I don't really didn't know him.
Where'd you go to training?
Huh?
Where'd you train?
Where'd I train?
At Mesker.
In Mesker. And then you were a paramedic from what year? 61 to 1?
61 till 93. Hey, I think that's 30 years, isn't it? I think I worked at Barron for 30 years.
So I knew Leo. I parked his car at the racetrack.
Oh,
Leo was a very good.
I was looking for my
I
phone,
liked
it's
it.
on his lap.
Louisiana, 63 to 90, 94.
To 93.
I liked old Leo. He drove that. He drew the Electra 225, the gold one with the black roof or white roof. He'd come out to track. He'd go golf at Rolling Hills. Then I worked at the track. I'd park him at the Palace. He'd go work a little bit in the morning. Then he'd go there. But he got a lot of business. They did the Jewish temple here. They redid Willard Library. The Jewish temple, you were probably part of that building. And then they've done tons of other things in town. Now, I'll have you list them. Think of them chronologically. I'm going to think of, you could think of some of them. Just some of them. They did a lot, okay?
I can tell you that.
You're not videoing, are you? Okay.
guys are saying
I
good
ran
stuff.
the plumbing and heating department, so I did. That was my bailiwick. And after I got there and trained for it.
You were chair.
And I guess the biggest thing in Evansville I did was I did the plumbing and heating in the Fifth Third
Fifth Third.
Fifth Third Bank.
Fifth Third Bank. That's about a 17, 18-story building. It's our
That's right.
tallest building in
That's
Evansville.
right.
Really a big building. So this is Paul Swope, S-W-O-P. He's from McCutcheonville. And we're interviewing him on things about World War II and the family store in McCutcheonville. His daughter Paula is here with us from Texas, and she's been nice enough to bring him here for an interview today. Today's date is 5/23/23. So Paul was born 1928, so he's now
94.
94. The reason we're interviewing him is they've given us a lot of information on John Weaver. He was a guy from the church in McCutcheonville. The name of the church,
McCutcheonville Methodist Church.
Methodist Church, which is one of the oldest churches in our community, and their cemetery is one of the oldest. Has a lot of ancestors of the Evansville area. This is a city north, a suburb north of Evansville. So we're lucky to have the Swopes here today. And then the Swopes had a little grocery store, hand me that book, had a little grocery store in McCutcheonville. The little grocery store was called Swope's Grocery. And so you had a lot of small grocery stores that were in the 1900s all the way until the 1950s or 60s when the big wigs moved them out, like Kroger, A&P, Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, and some other big ones, and now Walmart, Amazon, everything else pushed them out. So it's the big fish who swallowed up the little fish. But they were a little fish in World War II. And it's very interesting. His daughter gratefully brought him here today. So we're going to talk about the grocery store. But it's very interesting. The 101st Airborne, the 502nd Battalion from the 101st Airborne, spent a lot of time here. Now, 101st Airborne is famous from World War II. The parachuters trained here at Fort Campbell, Kentucky here. And they spent their time up by their grocery and camped out there. There was not enough room in Evansville, so they put their tents up. And so then they'd fly down in the day. So tell us about this, Paul, just about the experience of the 101st Airborne, the 502nd Battalion. Tell me how many troops were there. And you were, 12 to 15 years old, 16 years old, seeing a lot of this.
14 years old then.
So tell us just about what happened, your dad's grocery, how they split the grocery up, and what those troops did during the day, what plane they'd get on in Evansville and go, what would they do?
They would, it was, like he said, the 502nd Battalion of the 101st Airborne Division. And they were camped out in McCutcheonville. There were three companies in McCutcheonville, one on Whetstone Road, one on the McCutcheonville Park, and another one up Browning Road. They split the three of them up. Anyway,
How many in each company? About 100 in each company?
I had a hard time figuring that out. The internet says there was 112, I think,
I see.
but I don't know for sure exactly how many there was.
And they stay
I
in
don't
tents
think-
or in houses?
It was in tents,
All of them in their own tent?
in their pup tents,
Uh-huh,
where
yeah.
each man carries half a tent, you know?
Yes.
That's what, and the headquarters company was down behind the airport someplace. Now, what tents the officers were living in, I don't know, but that was the men in pup tents.
We're at the Evansville Airport right now. This is the approximate area where they would come down and then be deployed to their practice grounds down south of here. But so this is about a 10-minute drive now for you to, from your McCutcheonville area to
No,
here.
yeah.
At that time, it might have been 20 minutes. So they would spend the nights up there in the evenings, but in the daytime they'd come down here and work. But tell us what a day was, a typical day for you watching all these soldiers, and were they well behaved, or they?
Oh,
good
yeah,
fellows?
they was well behaved. There was,
Young. What was their age about?
they was everywhere from 18 to 20, in their 20s, I imagine, was their age. And they, like all soldiers, they were young men, you know. And they came down to the airport in trucks, got on C-47s, flew down to Tennessee over the maneuvers, jumped out down there, getting ready for maneuvers, you know. And then they truck them back to McCutcheonville.
Maneuvers for what?
Maneuvers, getting them ready for jumping into Normandy.
Yes. So for D-Day, and this was 43, and this is 43, we're talking about a year ahead of time about
Yeah,
their
you're right.
practice.
I think it was 2 years ahead of time,
Yeah.
for the time they jumped into Normandy.
Yeah, so
Whatever it
42.
was.
And they, how long did they stay up there? They stay up there half a year, or just how much?
It was during the summer,
Summer of 43.
summer of 43, yes.
So all summer they were up there. Now, the C-47 is an interesting plane. A C-47, we still have them flying. We're gonna have a C-47 here in about 2 weeks. It's gonna be here. It's been here 2 or 3 times. The C-47 has a lift of about 28,000 pounds, and it has 2 decent-sized engines on each side. The width of the C-47 is close to 100 feet in diameter, about 96 feet or so. It barely fits in our hangar. We've backed it up into our hangar here before. But the C-47 is really a DC-3. The
Correct.
DC-3s were made about 1933, 36, but airplane traffic went up 600% because of that plane, because it could hold as much as 20 customers or so. So airlines could make money starting 1936. So airplane traffic went up 600% in 1936 because of this plane. Now, before we had the tri-motor Ford here about a month ago here, a tri-motor Ford would only hold about 10 people. So airlines couldn't make as much money because it only held 10 people. But this one was an amazing breakthrough in airplane traffic. So they sold it for to airlines from 36 to 41, and then they modified this plane, and they made it in Santa Monica, California, and they made about 10,000 during World War II, and they were called C-47s.
Yes.
Now, they got a back door to this plane, and that's where all these paratroopers they'd hang up on a line, on about 19 would hang up, and they would, and we've had a video of that done here of practicing, and they'd hang up on a chute that would automatically pull their main chute when they jump out. So this was a practice ground. Parachuting was invented more by the Russians about 1936. The Germans used it on the island of Corsica and in Greece one time, and they weren't successful. They landed differently. They put their pack separately than their body, and so they had 2 parachutes come, and they would often lose the second parachute with all their goods. The Americans did it differently, and we used a lot of it. 50,000 parachuters were parachuted during D-Day time, about a 3-day period of time. Think of 50,000 parachutes come out of the sky, so you could go behind enemy lines. Today's day and age, we don't use them as much because we've got helicopters that put you down on the ground and different things. But he saw these young kids that were paratroopers land. So when you paratrooper lands, they land on their side and they roll, and they usually have their pack weighs as much as they do. If I weigh 150 pounds, I got a pack of 150 pounds. So parachuting, they get behind the lines. On D-Day, there was bad weather and the winds took them to different areas. So it was difficult for parachuters during World War II. but they were very effective. Gliders were made down south of here and used in practice down at Breckenridge and down at Sturgis. A lot of gliders were used in that D-Day time frame. Now, these young guys had to train. Did any of them come back during the day, Paul, that were injured because they broke their leg after they dreamt out of those airplanes?
I never saw any of them that came back from Tennessee that were injured. I'm sure there was either broken legs, sprained ankles, and everything else. I would imagine. I don't know. I wasn't privileged to any of that.
So, but yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
The men also had their wives come and stay at houses here around.
Well, there was a few of them did.
But his mother put 2 of them up at their house.
I see. So people in McCutcheonville, they were very nice to him.
Oh, yeah.
You know, out of the probably 300 soldiers there, might have been 10 or 15 married or 20 married, and the wives got housing up there. So that was nice of the local area. You find that everywhere in the United States. They were nice to the people. Now, tell us about the store that you had there. Just tell us what the grocery store was like, and tell us how you changed a little bit to the PX. You getting this all? You're getting everything?
Yeah, he's getting
The only thing that was changed from the PX, we had one counter there that had candy bars in it that nobody else, no other store could get candy bars, and they were forbidden to be sold, you know, to everything back in World War II, everything was rationed. Not only gasoline, which you hear about all the time, but canned goods, everything was rationed. You had stamps to get it.
You zoom it in. Right.
Anyway, Dad had a store there. It had gasoline pumps in front and he had shelving with canned goods
That's the store.
and had shelving of canned goods and Dad was he could do anything. He was a jack of all trades. He worked at BK for quite some time, so he could get stuff for
BK, what's BK? Better
Kellogg.
And what Better Kellogg? It's still a company that's still in existence in Evansville. One of the famous companies here. What'd they do, Better and Kellogg?
It was a warehouse. They sold everything to the smaller stores. Well, my dad for a time worked with them, I guess for about 10 years, the way I understand it.
Let me just take a break, turn it off for a second. Go ahead.
Well,
This is his grocery store, his dad's grocery, and the Texaco sign in front. Tell us how old that building was and how much you sold gas for.
Dad built that building in 1938, I think it was, and so it was a fairly new building, but it was just a shell for sanitary facilities. They had one holer out back, you know, and he did all kinds of repair work. He was a trained. He worked in Terre Haute as a jeweler for some time, so he was a jeweler. He could fix anything, and he was one of the only people I knew of that ever ran a store and made money at it in McCutcheonville.
And I see this, how big was this grocery? It looks like about 2,000 square feet at the most. It wasn't very big. Did you live on the back side of this, or?
No.
This is all grocery, right?
It was all grocery and things for automobiles. He had spark plugs and belts and all kinds of things.
And the grocery, did he cut his own meat and things of that sort?
The only meat he had was he had a package of
Bologna.
in the refrigerator. He'd change oil, or not even change oil. He'd add oil to a car or pump gasoline. Come in, somebody wanted a sandwich. He'd slice off a couple of pieces of bologna and slap it between some bread.
Yeah.
And that'd be it, you know.
How about, did he have any eggs there and bread and candy?
He had eggs and bread and different things, yes. And
Did most of the people from McCutcheonville go to the bigger grocery stores? They go to him because his prices were probably a little higher than the big groceries. What were the big groceries at that time in Evansville competing with him?
I guess Kroger was still in Evansville at that time. That's the only ones I can think of offhand.
Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, A&P.
A&P probably was in town.
Yeah.
But I was only 14 years old, so I
Yeah,
didn't
care about
remember
it.
all that stuff or didn't care about it, yeah.
What did Mom do during the day? And did she help with the grocery? And tell me what she did during the day.
Well, she helped at the grocery too sometimes, too, and helped over there.
How far away did you live? About a mile?
It was about that far. We lived over on Browning Road. He bought an old farmhouse there on Browning Road in 1924. And the house was a shell. Didn't have any water, didn't have any electricity, and nothing in it. It's a house. And of course there was a barn. It was an old farm. So,
No, I'm sorry.
So it was a,
There's the inside.
we had a ball barn there and had a chicken house and a couple other buildings there on the place.
So you sold your own chicken eggs there?
No, actually I think he had somebody bring him chicken eggs
I see.
and milk and everything other than that fresh stuff.
Did you ever work at the grocery a little bit?
Oh, yes.
What'd you do? Stock and do the cash register and do the gas and the oil and all that?
Yeah, I remember pumping gas for 17 cents a gallon.
Wow. We don't have that now. What is it now? $5 a gallon. Now, you have how many brothers and sisters? And did they work at the grocery too?
I had 2 brothers and 1 sister.
Older or younger?
The 2 brothers were quite a bit older than me.
Did they go to World War II?
My one brother had a hip problem, and he had one leg that was short, so he was 4F. The other brother, he was married and had kids, so he didn't get drafted until right at the tail end of the war.
So he didn't have to do too much.
No, he never got out of the States.
Never got out, yeah. And then your sister, what'd she do?
She was younger than me.
Did she work at the grocery store too?
Oh, sometimes she did, but not very much, but she did work there some. Like I say, she was 3 years younger than me, and I was only 14 during the World War II. So.
Did you go to grade school? And if you did, where'd you go?
McCutcheonville.
Did you go to high school?
I went to high school at Wrights High School.
That's where everybody was, district was. From there, Art Hall would take you there. Art, you probably knew him.
Yeah, I don't know, the county at that time, Wrights High School had the only vocational class for farmers.
Yes.
And I think the powers that be thought that everybody in Vandenberg County was farmers, so everybody in Vandenberg County went to Wrights. It was all bused to Wrights.
Yeah. Now, tell us about what your mom and dad and what you thought about when Pearl Harbor happened. Pearl Harbor happened when you were a youngster. Did your mom and dad say anything about when the bombing happened, Pearl Harbor, and then when we dropped the bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? What did they say about that?
Well, of course, Pearl Harbor, we listened to all the radio broadcasts and Franklin Roosevelt on the radio at that time.
That's his
And,
dad's radio at the store, and he broadcast it.
Yeah, we're going to show this radio right now. You talk about, we read what it says under there. Just tell me when you got it there. I'll try to hold it steady. There you go. This is his dad's radio. He had a radio that says receiver like this during World War II. He would listen to the news on BBC. Others would come into the store and listen. Remember, there was no TV at that time, and radio is how you communicate. So FDR said, this is a day in infamy. And so FDR would talk on the radio, and so would his wife, Eleanor, on a frequent basis. And that's how how the United States would communicate with, and we try to keep down the propaganda, but it was a way of communicating with the public. Can you tell us, when you were in the store, how many people would show up? About 10 people or a lot of
I
them?
don't know, it varied.
Yeah.
Whoever had room or time to come up. And they'd have BBC tuned in the evening, and they had a big speaker in the corner of the store, mounted for a big 12-inch speaker, and he had that radio hooked up to it. and he'd have that so everybody could listen.
And so,
BBC.
because a lot of people didn't have radios then, and he had a bigger radio, and it was sort of a group. People
Yeah.
would come down, your mother would come listen, and you'd come listen to
This was a helicopter's receiver, and he had a big antenna in the back. I think it was up on about 40 foot high with a big antenna on top of the pole. And he could get London that way, BBC.
better receiving than most people had around there. So that's how
That's
you
right.
got the news. If you go look at the Civil War, what Lincoln would do is go across to the telegraph machine every night to learn what was going on, and that was his way of communication. We have internet now, but at that time, your dad was probably one of the rare ones that had that big antenna and would get BBC, because that's
Yes.
where the real action was happening in Europe.
Yeah, the BBC had all the latest news. And everybody come up there, quite a few people would come up to the store, listen in the evening when Dad had BBC tuned in.
And would you go up and listen to it, Mom would listen, your sister and two brothers, or not always, but sometimes?
Not always. Now, my brother lived in the area there, one brother did. And the other brother, the oldest brother, he was the
One with the hip problem and was 4F.
well, the younger brother, the younger of the two older brothers had the 4F.
I see.
The older brother, he worked for Social Security. He was general manager of Social Security here in Evansville for years and years. I don't know how many years, I have no idea.
Yeah, Social Security started about 1936, and it started helping with the IBM computers, so that was still new at that time. FDR instituted it in his Congress, about 36. We never had Social Security before, so people of older bracket wouldn't be poor all their life.
Yeah.
But it was a nice setup. People complain about it, but your brother in charge, it's a big deal to be in charge of Social Security, so he must have been smart like you.
The Evansville area, he was in charge of it for, well, he was in different places and they moved him around.
What's your Social Security number? Just tell me the first three.
I don't remember.
Yeah, because
I don't even have it in my billfold.
because the numbers put you geographically, like mine's 305, 56, but the parts that put you in a geography area of where you signed up for your Social Security card. Now, back to World War II, you saw all these tents in this area, pup tents, all around your area. You never seen them before. They were down there where you lived and down near where your dad's store was. And so in the evening time, these soldiers would probably come by because they wanted to buy a candy bar, and they'd been working all day, but you would see the soldiers in the evening, would you not, or were they not allowed to leave their base?
Oh, they was allowed to leave at certain times. And then when they jumped down Tennessee and come back in the trucks, Dad sold a lot of sweet rolls and milk.
Yes,
Quarts of milk and sweet rolls. That's what they seemed like they wanted.
because they had money too.
Oh yeah, they had their regular pay.
Yes, yeah.
Like I think the troopers had a boost up on their pay
Yeah,
from a regular soldier, from a ground soldier.
yeah, they had air, well, you get air pay or dangerous duty pay if you're
Yeah.
jumping out of a plane,
Yeah.
probably dangerous duty pay.
That's probably what they called it.
So they had money to spend. Now, when they left, did you see any fear in their eyes because they were going to go off to World War II? You didn't see that. They were so far away, out of sight, out of mind. You didn't see fear in all those kids' minds.
They were all kids. They was having a big time.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, now, I want to change the scene a little bit to Camp Breckenridge. Very rarely does anybody know about Camp Breckenridge, but Camp Breckenridge was created in the war, I think 1942 or so. I think Breckenridge was a big name in politics in Kentucky. And at Camp Breckenridge, they took that area by eminent domain. A lot of people actually from here and there lost their property. And they wanted to give it back to them at a lower price at a later time. But so Breckenridge was a camp that helped hold soldiers that were prisoners from Germany. So we had 3,000 German prisoners there, but we also had troops that were training in Breckenridge, up to 60,000 troops. And on the weekend, those guys didn't have where to go, so they'd flood into Evansville. So
That's right.
they'd get on a truck, people would take you hitchhiking. So it's about 40 miles from here, but they would get up here for the weekend. So tell us a little bit of what your thoughts of Breckenridge, because there's a training camp. Joe Louis, the big boxer, was there. I think, and Senator Dole, that died recently, he was stationed in Evansville overnight. And I don't think he was stationed in Breckenridge, but Joe Louis was stationed there, and some other famous people. I think the big baseball guy, the first guy that beat the color barrier, was famous, Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson, I believe, was stationed there. Those are important people, but it was just 60 miles from Evansville, so they needed outlets, and their outlets was to come and have a good time in Evansville. Can you tell us what you witnessed, because you were first-hand witness at age 16 of going down to Breckenridge. Tell us what it was like there from you as a young kid.
Well, I know all the Breckenridge people came in. There were some couple of big USOs in Evansville. They come in to dances and so forth. And there was groups that had girls that would meet them at the USO and dance with them and so forth. I know that. I've read that.
The USO, we have a room represents USO behind us, behind this red cross here building. So we had an African American USO and a Anglo-Saxon USO in Evansville. But Larry Head's mother would go there. Larry Head's a volunteer, and he would tell me this story that his mother needed her preacher to sign a piece of paper so she could go in the USO. They didn't want women of the night to be in the USO. So they kept the women of the night out of the USO by girls having to go get with their preacher to sign that they could go in the USO. So they had, didn't want all the, the other stuff going on there. But that happened. The women that got in there were women that were, good Christian girls from our local area, or the preacher would sign. There were, Christian girls would sign up, and they would go in there to dance with these guys, because these guys were lonely from home. But you would see them go to USO. Tell us other things you would see there, Paul.
Well, there was a lot of them on Main Street. Of course, Main Street at that time was different than it was now.
Main Street in Evansville.
Main Street in Evansville was quite different then than it was now, is now. The street had businesses for sale, people, there was business that were selling things go up and down Main Street. And then as far as Breckenridge is concerned, my brother got a contract with the Red Cross, I think it was, I'm guessing there really, but I think it was with the Red Cross, to take pictures of the men, the prisoners, down at Breckenridge. And I got an article about it in that group of stuff I gave you. And he had, I was 16 at the time, and he pressed me into service. He had 2 cameras, he had 2 speed graphics. He set up down there to take pictures, and it was very funny, I thought. Well, there was a few of the prisoners that had good uniforms. And there was a few, though, most of them just had coveralls with a big PW on them, painted on them. And it was funny, I thought, that some of the guys get in front of the camera, they'd try to hide the PW. And other ones, they want to show that PW, but they were a prisoner. But
He photographed every prisoner, you think?
Every prisoner that I understand, every prisoner that was there.
You still have copies of that?
No. But he had to make 2 copies, and I assume one copy was for the prisoners to send back to Germany, and the other was for their personal use. So, other than that, that's about all I know. Oh, there was one guy they put in there to help us. Was an officer, a German officer, and he had been trained. He had went to college here in this area, and life of me, I can't remember what he said, what college he went to. I was only 16, so I didn't remember. But anyway, he went to college in this area, and he knew the area very well. He was in his military uniform, and he stayed with us almost all the whole time there while we was taking those pictures. there'd be no guards or no, none of the American guards would be in there with us.
Yep.
Most of the guards were, as I understood it, most of the actual guards there were American boys that had served already in Europe and had come back. And they were the guards there. But we had a dark room there that we changed. We was using cut film, if you know what cut film is. We was using cut film in those cameras because there wasn't any film packs available at the time. So we was using 3 1/4, 4 1/4, and 5x7 film, cut film. We'd take turns taking pictures and going in the restroom and changing out the film in the dark, you know, and taking more pictures. We had a stool set up for the guys to sit on. They'd come in, sit down, face the camera, we'd take a picture, next guy come up. So it was very, very organized very quickly.
Did you put their name under their picture, and how did you know who they were, and did you develop them all there?
No, Bub took them, my brother, took them into Evansville and had them develop them. I don't know whether Smith Butterfield did it or Walgreens. There was the 2 big ones here in that town at that time. And make 2 prints for him. Then he'd sort them out and get all the prints, the 2 prints together. Then he'd take them down to Breckenridge. How they got them to the right person, I don't know. I guess the officers down there did it. I have no idea how they did that part of it. I didn't have anything to do with that.
The one thing that I like the story is they got to eat with the guys.
Yeah,
And they don't, outside the base, you don't get the food that, and he,
So it was good food in there, wasn't it,
yeah.
Paul?
All our food at home was rationed, you know. Everything was rationed. Whether canned goods or fruit or everything was in canned goods was rationed. Well, all meat was rationed too. And, but they had everything. They
They had the best food you had, huh?
yeah, we had fruit salad. I remember fruit salad in a cereal bowl, and that was the best lunch I had in a long time.
Well, prisoners of war is a big debate on what they were doing with them, but if you read about the history of the prisoners of war down there, they tried to escape all the time. There was only one officer supposedly, and there were a lot of non-commissioned officers, but mostly enlisted, were there from the German war. Spoke German. A lot of it was problematic with communication, but they worked on the farms down there. In 1943, that was 42. The harvest was a big problem because a lot of the people that did the harvest were off to war, so they helped a ton in doing the harvest. So they would harvest this corn, the soybean, the tobacco, and did a lot of work for little pay. It said they paid him, I think, $2 a day or something like that. It was, and they'd see 80 cents of it. Maybe it was an hour per the day, but
I have no idea about that. I know that they did a lot of the harvesting and working on the farms down there.
so they got paid, actually got paid for that. German prisoners were treated reasonably well. There's also a piano player, a piano maker from Vienna that was there, and he actually had 10 people working on it, and they would repair a lot of pianos. Remember, pianos was a big deal. We didn't have TV yet, had just radio, and so player pianos plus real pianos. They sold the most from 1900, about 1920, but a lot of pianos were around, and in USOs, and right there at Breckenridge, this guy repaired these pianos and go back to the USOs. So these prisoners had some talents, and they utilized their talents. They just didn't waste their time and sit there and do nothing. And they had them work on roads. They had them do other things that were needed in the community. So Kentucky area, even as far as Henderson, got workers from there. They'd usually get up at 5 and work and be up till 7 or 8 at night, but they'd work better than an 8-hour day, paid minimum amount, but they were treated well.
Fed well.
and fed well, but it's a big debate of the Geneva Convention, and everything. How do you treat prisoners? And these, if you look at that treated that prisoner, they're probably better treated than the Germans or the Japanese treated our American prisoners. But I don't know the history of that.
Yeah.
But you got to see that firsthand. Now, some of these people were artists, some were amateur artists. Did you see any of the artwork that they drew on the walls down there?
I've heard about it and read about it. I know there was some good artists in the prisoners group, and they painted some big pictures up there, but I did not see them at that time. And a couple other things I want to say about that deal at the Breckenridge. First off, one time we went down there to take pictures. It was during the Battle of the Bulge, and the officers, the German officers, had all their men out doing goose steps on it. So they were still political. And also, they come in to sit down in front of the cameras, Bub's cameras, and Bub, my brother. And they'd look over at that camera. He had Zeiss lenses. They said, Zeiss. they do that.
Knew the brand.
Yeah, do the brand, sure. They all came from Germany. And seemed like there's something else I was going to tell you about that.
They had a lot of soccer teams, softball, boxing, wrestling. That camp had up to 46 teams of that stuff. They also donated a lot of the money, the Germans, that they made to the International Red Cross, and a lot of that money would go to the soldiers that were in prison camps, other places that weren't as well off as here. If you go down to Sturgis, which borders Breckenridge, there's 2 or 3 big airstrips left from World War II. They have one left, but a lot of the planes we made here, a lot of plane traffic had to happen at that time. So World War II changed everything right here. If you go north of here, it's Lawrenceville, Illinois. They have 3 big landing strips, and all of it was for the P-47s they made here and were transported up there and stored up at Lawrenceville. But Breckenridge became a mecca for a lot of things, and the gliders were used down there at Breckenridge and used that with the parachute
training. Yeah.
It was a heck of a place down there that you saw as a young kid. That at that time didn't totally appreciate it, but it was a pretty important time in how to handle the prisoners.
Yeah, they handled them well, I thought. Fed them well, for sure.
Yeah.
And
they worked 6 days a week at that prison camp, and some people were trained in orthopedics, helped make braces. And then they got rid of, there were only 700 prisoners left in December of 45, so they started moving them back to Germany at that time. Even back in November, they shipped 400 prisoners back to Germany, so they couldn't keep them here forever. They wanted to get them back to their normal life a little bit. But could you understand any of those prisoners when you were taking pictures of them?
oh, some of them spoke English, very few. But I didn't have, well, the one that was there with us all the time, of course, he could speak English better than I could, probably. And like I say, he went to college here in the Midwest. So he was well-educated person.
There's some documentation that says that Breckenridge Camp and surrounding areas saved that area $4 million, according to the Gleaner that's from Henderson in 1945. $3.5 million was cut from the work performed at the campsite. $28,000 was saved by prisoners growing crops at the camp. Another $192,000 is paid to the U.S. Treasury by the farmers, who paid $2 a day for the prisoner to work. But the prisoner only saw 80 cents of that $2 a day. But that's a big contribution to utilize prisoners for things as opposed to just wasting their time. They also harvested, they said 100,000 bushels of apples, peaches, that otherwise would have just been lost because there was nobody there to harvest things. Remember, all the young men were off, that were the big farmers. They let farmers stay around, but a lot of farmers had to stay back. A lot stayed back, but some, they actually went to war. let's talk to a staff sergeant at World War II, they said one farmer's worth 100 city boys. Because farmers could work, they knew how to fix things, and things weren't always right. Their one officer was named Hepler. They said he was the only officer there. He couldn't speak English, but he went to another camp way over in Mississippi at one time, and at that they had the Germans even when they marched to church one time sang a song that was, and nobody knew what they were singing, but it was giving the Nazis some praise. And so when they found out about that, they got in trouble for doing that. So and he ended up becoming the boyfriend of the man that owned the the man that owned the plantation's wife. So they didn't like that guy very much down there in Mississippi. But he was an officer here. You might have met that guy.
I have no idea. I might have, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I do know in McCutcheonville there, when the men came to camp there was an advanced group to figure out where the rest of them were going to be. Naturally, they always said, do things upright, you know. So the advanced group was there at Memorial Day, and they all marched with the flag and everything, and attended our Memorial Day service at the cemetery. And
we still had that today, but that's nice that they showed up for that.
Yeah,
in
they showed
uniform
up.
and things.
they all marched up there, and I don't know exactly how many was in that advanced group. I wish I knew.
Where'd you get the water for those people? Where the bathrooms and all the other things that you have?
Slit trenches.
Slit trenches, what they use, yeah.
And water, they hauled it in on their own trucks.
Well, how about other questions, Paula, that we've not covered, and McKay, that you know that we need to cover with Paul?
Have you,
What is that?
that's the pictures of men that were at war in his daddy's store. He would hang him up in his store. Dad can tell you more about that.
Okay, we will show that. You talk about so a lot of those soldiers that were there will show pictures. This is a picture of his daddy's store. You got it? Okay, his daddy's store. And you look at all those military people. Remember, there were over 300 around there, but your daddy got a fondness for them. But they have
This was people from the McCutcheonville
Oh,
area.
from the Cuttsville area, so
Yeah.
during war, not just ones that were stationed around there. So I count about 25 from the Cuttsville area that went to World War II.
Yeah.
There's over 25, and so he kept them memory sake there. Did all of them come back, or some of them get killed?
Two failed to come back.
Two failed to come back. So
One was a pilot, and I understand that he was shot down in the South Pacific somewhere. And the other one was just barely a little bit older than me, and so I could have been gone too. He was maybe 2 or 3 years older than me, and barely got into service. And he was killed in the Battle of the Bulge.
yeah, my uncle. That started December 17th. I lost my uncle in the Battle of the Bulge too, Marvin DeWitt. So he was lost at age 22, young age, and Battle of the Bulge happened December 17th of 45. So, or 44 actually. So the war was about over. We hate to lose anybody. We lost a guy from Cuttsville. I didn't know his name, but your daddy having those pictures up there was very nice for people. Parents would come in there and see his store, and they liked their kids being up there and you picture their uniform.
In that CD I gave you, there's that picture that you just put on the camera. Plus, there was a list of all the guys' names.
Good. We'll have the list of the names. We want to have that list of names, and we'll keep it in our archives. That's very important that we have that. I guess she's going to show it to us. Paul's got everything.
She's probably.
We'd like to see those names here on the movie, just because people that may watch this are from the Cuttsville area. But we'll make it available to people. It's probably on your swope.org too.
Aerial photos.
How about other things, Paul, McKay, or other things you would like to say, Paul?
Yeah.
What do you think about freedom and the kids today? What do you think is important for the next generation in regards to freedom?
What was that?
Well, they take it for granted, I'm sure. And,
Oh.
but we were right at that age, we was right in the middle of it. And
Yeah, you don't realize how nice our country is. The older we get, the more we appreciate it, so.
Yeah.
But kids will understand. I think traveling overseas helps you have more appreciation
The
of
plane that hit the house.
Hit my uncle's house.
the P-47.
P-47,
Okay,
yeah.
we're gonna talk about this. Now, the P-47s, we made over 6,200 of them here in Evansville, Indiana. And after they made them, we made one every 2.5 hours, 10 a day. And there were only, I think, 2 or 3 accidents. The test pilots had to take them out first, and so they usually went over McCutcheonville and over by Fort Branch was the test area. But you see, this is your uncle's house where one of the planes hit his house in McCutcheonville. Tell us about what you remember, because you went over and saw that. Tell us
Oh,
about
yeah.
that.
There's more.
That house was right in line with north-south runway.
Right, north-south runway, it was in line with, so what happened to the plane? Did they tell you?
Well, there was 2 different schools of thought that I heard. One was that the propeller itself, and of course they were variable pitch propellers, and it malfunctioned. The other I heard that the engine quit, so I don't really know which happened. But anyway, it tilted up there. The left wing hit the house at the eve line, tore the left wing off. The right wing hit the tree, took the right wing off. He was trying to get it between the house and the tree. He tilted it up trying to get through there.
Almost.
He was and there's,
He was a test pilot, and he didn't get through. Did he live or did he get killed?
no, he run back up to the house to see if he heard anybody. So I understand.
So he jumped right out of that plane. But
Yeah.
that was, I think, only one of 3 accidents that happened in Evansville, but that's really nice to have that information there.
Well,
That's
that-
your uncle's house. What was your uncle's name and what was his address?
Well, he was in McCutcheonville. He was Jason McCutcheon was his name, living in McCutcheonville he lived on Swope Lane.
On Swope Lane, okay,
Yeah.
so we can look that up. That'd be right north-south runway, so probably maybe 360 degrees north of here.
The airport took it over.
It did take it over, okay. It took
They
that-
just did.
My grandpa, as I understand it, had 125 acres there north of the airport. Of course, the airport owns it all now.
Yeah.
And they took that house that he lived in. It was an old house. It was torn down years and years ago. But McCutcheon's house was a newer house, and it had been expanded a couple of times, but that airplane hit it. And I was a kid then. I guess that was maybe about 15, 16 years
Yeah.
old. And a bunch of us boys, we knew, they had the road going back there, Swope Lane, they had it blocked off. Sheriff had it blocked off naturally, so nobody get back there. So we went around through the fields on our bicycles, and so I got down there by that airplane. So
You good about 10 feet from the airplane, you could see it?
Oh, yeah, I would go right up next to it, I was touching it.
And as the picture shows the propeller blades were bent,
Yeah.
but you saw both wings off, both the end of the wings were off.
Yeah.
Boy, that was a heck of a pilot to land that, wasn't it? You
He
see,
turned it up on edge trying to get through there.
yeah.
As I understand.
Was there a big field there? There's a field that he would have landed in?
Yeah, he slid down over the hill. That was all farm ground at that time.
Yeah.
And there's a big piece about him in one of those CDs.
What's his name? Do you remember the
I
test
don't
pilot?
remember, I
Yeah.
don't remember his name offhand.
But he jumped out of the plane and walked up to your house and it went over, hurt anybody. Did anybody get hurt in your house?
I think that my cousin, who was standing in the kitchen washing dishes, I think the paper said, and she got a bump on the head. and
Did
was
she?
off.
Something hit her, yeah.
Yeah, but nobody really got hurt real bad.
I found the names if you want them.
Yeah, the
Okay.
names are there.
Yeah, okay, we'll put them on there. Just keep them on there.
Okay.
Okay, the P-47 was a very loud machine. When we had 22 World War II veterans on top of the old National Bank building here in 2016, about 7 years ago, and they were watching an LST reenactment. We have the only LST left in the world functioning here in Evansville.
Yes.
1100 made. but they watched the LST reenactment with the Higginsville, but then all of a sudden we had two P-47s fly around and they heard the sounds, and there wasn't a dry eye in a place because the sound was so loud. A lot of these were local boys that remembered that sound of World War II. You'll never forget that sound. It was a loud plane that flew right over your house all the time. You had to hear it all the time.
Here in the machine, they had a big mound of earth back on the airport, and every airplane that come off the line went back there, and they had to aim their guns in and shoot them 50 calibers into that pile of dirt, and that was loud.
It's right by Sunset Cemetery. They tore it down about 14 years ago. We have a picture upstairs of that, right? That little clipboard. It's back in the educational area. But that every plane after it was made, it came out of Republic Aviation, and they tested the brakes, checked its magnetics. And the third thing they did is it wouldn't check the aiming on all 8 guns, and they shot it into a hill that faced Sunset Cemetery. So that was the 3 things every test pilot did. Then the test pilot would fly it around to see if it was all right. Then the women were called ferry pilots, and they would take it to some other city and park it.
The test pilots didn't do those 3 things. In fact, my cousin was hired for a while. He was a graduate of Park Center College over in Illinois, and he got a job. He had to check all the instruments to see if they were working correctly. He taxied it out, make sure the brakes were working right. They had a big slab of concrete with the compass roads on it.
We still have it. It's still here at the airport. The
It's
compass
still there.
roads is still here. We wanted to take it up, put it in another place. The compass roads is still here, right north of Republic Aviation.
Yeah.
We've seen copies of it. They'd sit right on compass roads and make sure they're magnetic, so you got to know where you
Make
were.
sure the big compass was working right.
Yeah.
Then he would taxi it on over to the mound of dirt.
And he'd shoot the guns,
He'd turn it over to the gunners.
and the gunners, he'd have to get out of the plane. The gunners.
He'd go back and get another plane to check it out.
But then the plane is not aimed right. They had to get it up in the air to aim
They had
that.
the tail end up in the air.
They had to put the back end up for it to aim right.
Just be level, yeah.
What was his name, your cousin?
It was Harlan Peck.
Harlan Peck. He was from Evansville, but he trained over in Illinois, and he was really the person that probably taxied a lot of these planes to check the magnetics and to check the brakes, magnetics and instruments, and then he drove it over to the firing range, and then he let somebody else do that.
Yeah,
And then
right.
somebody else brought it back besides him.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know, I assume so.
I never knew that. That's very interesting. The test pilots didn't do that. They all checked it out, and then the test pilot would take it after that.
After everybody got done with it, they had a Republic test pilot that fly it. Then they finally okay it and turn it over to the Army test pilot.
You had to have 2, I guess. You had to have the civilian, and then the Army bought it from the civilian
That's
after
right.
A guy named Harold
That's right.
Morgan's dad was an inspector here, and he did a lot of the inspecting of things.
Yeah, Harold Morgan, I lost track of him.
He's living from Mount Vernon area. He lives out, I think, near you now, but he's very much a historian. He's got about 6 books here,
Oh, man,
and he went to original.
He
I
interviewed
got-
Dad and has some of his stories in there.
We'll have to get some of his stories. You mean interviewed his on tape or just in the book? You're in his books?
No, he used some of my stuff in his books. Certain things he expanded on. He researched them pretty well. He was a researcher.
Yeah, he was always in the libraries. Every time I'd be walking in, he'd be walking. I'd been there all day.
He would get everything he could glean out of the newspapers.
Yeah, he went to all the libraries, had all the photographs, and then he made books interesting because he said what these pictures meant. It wasn't just a picture. He gave a description of it.
And he'd do seminars and stuff.
Yeah.
I had 2 or 3 of his books. I can't remember how many. I had some of his books.
He's given talks for us multiple times. He's not healthy right now, so he can't talk anymore. He was going to be on our board. He could have been, but
So sad.
where do you live right now, Paul? In McCutcheonville?
I live at the
The village.
Village, Heritage Village.
Yeah.
It's a assisted living place is where I'm living now.
Yeah, my brother-in-law runs that the last 30 years. Mr. Hester, now Mr. Dunnigan's son runs it, but very nice place. I might move in there with you.
Come on.
My wife won't give me permission yet, but I'm gonna be there next.
It's a nice place.
I know it's nice, very nice on the north side of town.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of other activities and things, get on the bus, go places. Any other questions, Paula or McKay?
Unless you wanted to see the,
Yeah, we want to see the list of the soldiers from McCutcheonville. We're going to put the list of them, that we had the pictures, but we're going to have a list of who these, we're going to have a list of these soldiers, and I will read their names, because they're the real warriors that helped save us in World War II. So you got them there in focus. I'll just tell you what to do. Okay. Glenn Hartig,
Yeah, neighbor.
Ken McCutcheon, Chet Steiner, James France, Ken Connor, Jack Kaler, James Agnes, Horace Moffett, Charles Moffett, Alan Moffett, Paul Moffett, Malcolm Moffett, Paul Hagan, Charles Richardville, Don Hessman, Jack Hahn, Lee Holsey, Philip Ryan. In the second row, Carl Whitty, Harvey Guthridge, Earl Schoaf, Harry Thompson. Harry Thompson, I believe, was a retired colonel. I'm pretty sure Wright had a stained glass shop in Newburgh, but I'm not 100% sure. They call him Harry Thompson. Harry Heim, Ed Kaler, Thurston McCutcheon, John McCutcheon, Paul Drain, Jack Drain, Hugh Henry, Don Henry, Harold McCutcheon. Then we go to, I missed some, Curry Oliver, Ambrose Oliver, Jimmy Torian. Now Torian has an insurance company here. It's probably related to Torian Insurance.
Yeah.
Bowie Watson, Earl Watson, Roy Patterson, Lloyd Patterson, Roy Ryan. Roy Ryan was famous. I think he might have got blown up in that car that time. He was the one that blew up in the car over by St. Vincent's Hospital. Floyd Grant, Kenneth Johan. Johan had a funeral home. It might have been related. Milan McCutcheon. Bottom row was Dale Work. Dale Work was in charge. He was the manager of our airport here for about 20 years. Lived over on the south side of town. But he was, if you look, Dale Work was an important part of the airport here. Dwight Swope, is that your brother?
that's
Right, oldest brother.
The oldest brother, Dwight Swope, Bill Nicholson, and the one that died in action has a star. So the two that died in action is Ed Kaler and Thurston McCutcheon. So our Memorial Day is dedicated to them. So this is the pictures that we will show. Can you get them? Mm-hmm. So this is the first and second row, and then we go to the other one. This is the first and second row behind the desk. And then here's the last row behind the or third row, and then here's one other section here. So it's nice that your dad did this. It says here, McCutcheonville Benefit Club, help your community, $5. Okay. Well, I can't thank you enough, Paula, for having Paul come today and interview. We will put this on YouTube, and we will also send you a disc of that, and send a couple addresses, your three sisters or two sisters, and we'll send a DVD copy to all of you and one to him. So we just need addresses of 4 people, and we'll send them off to you, and then you can look at them on a DVD player. We don't do it on, so a lot of people don't have DVD players anymore, but
right.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for all of your help. Will help the history of Evansville. Thank you, McCutcheonville. Okay. This is, the Swope family has their own internet. It's Albert Edward Swope family, winter of 1928. And you go to McCutcheonville history, and you can find a lot of what we talked about. You're going to have to find it for me here.
Just go to the menu.
Go to menu.
McCutcheonville history.
McCutcheonville history. There it is. There's this picture of his grocery store, picture of the outside, inside. So tremendous, interesting information. The Swopes are really got horses there. Do you have horses too?
His daddy had horses and mules. Or
Had
his
horses.
grandpa.
Had horses and mules. Run at Ellis? Or no?
No.
Yeah.
But
Farming.
he had horses before tractors.
Memorial Day is only a week away, and we've been celebrating since about 1868, since Logan's orders. We do multiple Memorial Day events in the Evansville area. Now, this is one that was done during the war, during World War II, and you see the flags there, you see the men, and giving tribute to the soldiers that have given their lives for our country. We've had 1.2 million soldiers give their lives, 4,000 and 5,000 soldiers during World War II. So this is a nice tribute, and McCutcheonville does this for our fallen soldiers and people that have given their life the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom.
A store there. He'd go to work 6 o'clock in the morning, usually get home about 10 o'clock at night. 7 days a week. They wanted me to take over that store when Dad died. No way. I ain't gonna work that much.
That's how the grocery men did it. My grandpa had a cigar store called Acme Cigar Store downtown Evansville. He worked the same hours, 7 days a week. And they worked all the time. It's just like retail and restaurant business in one.
Yeah.
And so your dad only worked 16 hours a day every day. Only 16 hours a day. You were smart enough to say, I don't want to do that.
I don't wanna do that. I already had a job at Mesker Steel, 8 hours, 5 days.
In 5 days. So he worked at Master Steel, then he worked for the Perrin Construction. So he worked there all the way to 1994. So
Yeah.
he's really seen a lot of the Evansville area. Tell us some of the constructions that, tell us a couple things Mesker Steel did, and then tell us, because they were our other steel company in World War II. We had International Steel and we had Mesker Steel. Tell us a few things they made that you recall, and then Perrin and what you did recall.
I recall that when I first went down to Mesker, they still had the Chrysler was repairing tanks at that time. And they had the hulls of the tanks sitting on flat car, welding on them in the Mesker. And I understand, and I wasn't there at that time, but I understand for LSTs, they prefabricated some gun mounts and things like that they put on the LST. Of course, I'm sure International had the same stuff they were doing. But as far as Perrin was concerned,
Think of some of the big buildings you did in Evansville. They've done so many, and Leo Perrin came up here from Louisiana, and he just instrumental in having Perrin, which is over 50 years of construction in the Evansville area. You started there in '61. They just closed their business about 2018 or so. So this is 60
like
plus years. Tell us a few of the structures you made.
man, I can't remember them all. We had schools everywhere. We had hospitals in Vincennes we built, and
Made our Jewish temple here in Evansville, out in Newburgh area.
well,
That might have been after your
that was
time.
probably after my time, yeah, I think it was. But there was a lot of buildings in that time that we worked on. Of course, I was only interested in the plumbing and heating end of it. And of course, Perrin, he did all the general construction too, basically, so.
Okay, well, thank you again. Okay.
Hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
The USO, the big USO, there were several as I understand it, and later on I understood, but the big USO was the old train station down on 8th Street. And
That was called the CNEI train station, I believe. It's at the Main Street. It was at 7th, it was 8th and Main, and now the city county building's there. But it was a big station, had 4 big pillars there, and it became after it was the train station, it became the USO station.
That's right.
In World War II, where they went to dance and things of that sort.
Also, it was used for a youth center right after the war, because I used to go down there when I was in high school and go to dances and stuff.
A lot of men met their brides there.
Yeah.
There was a lot of courtships there.
Probably was. There was 4 big columns on the front of that big old building, and when they tore that building down, they saved those columns. Why? Nobody knows why they saved them, but they were stored. So when they was looking around for something for the For Freedom Monument, they used those columns down on the river.
Well, I don't know where they stored them. They must have stored
I
them
don't
in
know
a
where
pretty
they
big
stored
place.
I don't know
Did
where
you
they
move
stored
them? You weren't the one that moved them down there. were you?
No, I didn't have anything to do with that.
So I think they probably had them stored for 30 years or so, maybe 25 years.
Yeah, 20, 25 years, and probably store say, hey, that'd make a good monument.
Okay, well, thank you, Paul, appreciate it.
Okay.
Is the Four Freedoms Monument. That's the main USO building behind Paul right there. You see the four pillars that are now downtown on the riverfront. It was formerly the CNEI Railroad building, and that is where all our animals came for the Shrine Circus from the 1930s on. They would unload at that building, and then they'd march down 8th or 7th Street to Washington Avenue and go to Washington Grade School, and that would happen. This building was raised in 1965. It was built in 1907, and was dedicated as a USO building in the war in 1943. And as Paul said earlier, they had a lot of dances and other things there. It culminated on Saturday night, little things, and when it was during the war, 278 beds, and the soldiers slept in the chairs, sofas, and on the floor. Now, you saw that Four Freedoms. Now, we want to talk about the modification plant. Modification plant was not Republic Aviation. It was right about where we're sitting here at the present time. Tell us about the modification center and what your brother or your uncle worked at. Tell them what that was for.
Well, the modification center, as I understand the things they did there, they'd fly planes in there and prepare them to go overseas. If they were going to take them to another country, they'd put the instruments in them so the pilots there could read the instruments and so forth. And one thing that I thought was very interesting they did, they put a 75 millimeter cannon, the old big cannon, in the front of the B-25s. And my uncle helped work on that. Cooksey was his name. And
What was his first name?
I'm trying to think. You asked me too quick.
But he worked on that. Now, we had Mike Rossi did a talk on the B-25s, and the B-25s, we modified some of the B-25s here, right here in Evansville at the Modification Center, but if you look at that cannon, didn't work out real well because it was hard to aim it, and it would hit something about 5 miles ahead of time, so they didn't do a lot of the cannon. It was a 75 millimeter cannon. It's just like the same as a Sherman tank, but then they put a lot of Browning 50
calibers,
50 calibers, as many as I think 9 on the front of that, and it was in the Battle of Bismarck, and I think it just ripped a whole Japanese ship apart. Those Browning automatics. So, but he had an uncle that worked there, and it was a tremendous credit to the Evansville area because they modified in World War II. If you look at the P-47, it's got P-47A all the way through the N. N is a Nancy model, and the N model was going to be made for Japan. It had more gas tank, and it could do longer trips. But H1 letter, the most they made was the P-47D model, was the main one made here. We made over 6,200 in Evansville, but what the modification center was to modify and make sure everything was all right. Can you tell us anything else about the modification center, what your uncle told you, Uncle Cooksey?
Well, my uncle said he helped mount that 75 millimeter on there. Of course, like you said, that later on they made a smaller gun out of it. The big problem with that 75, it had to be hand loaded. And anyway, they'd mount them 75s on there, fly up to Great Lakes, fly up to Lake Michigan, shoot it in the lake, and fly back, just to test it. So that's what I was told anyway, by him. Anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting.
Did he talk about any other that he modified there that you recall? Any other that he modified?
No, I can't remember any other ones, but I know on that picture that you could get off the internet, they said what plane that was sitting out there that they modified, and you could tell by the oil spots. There was a lot of planes went through there.
Yeah.
On the apron, you can see the parking area. You can see oil spots, and there was a lot of planes went through there. Of course, I lived right up the hill from there, so it was pretty interesting.
You're right off the north runway. Yeah, your grandpa had 125 acres there, 140. So yeah.
So we was up Petersburg Road and up Petersburg Road to McCutcheonville's where I lived.
Did the airplanes bother you? They landed over your house all the time. You hit your uncle's house, but they were landing all the time. It was a busy airport, wasn't it, during World War II?
Very busy, very busy.
Because if there were 10 planes they made a day, they had to test most of them in the daytime. So if it was bad weather, they couldn't test them. So they test them. You heard them all the time.
Heard them all the time. Our school bus went by that area, so we see them, 100 of them parked out on the apron there.
Yeah.
And they were shooting them guns back there. Man, they rattled the windows up in McCutcheonville.
Just the noise, yes.
Just the noise from them guns.
Yeah. They never broke your windows, did you? The plane sounds or anything?
No.
Yeah.
They had the 50 caliber guns. They had, you'd check one of those cartridges. There's a lot of powder in that thing. It made a lot of noise.
Very powerful. The P-47, the power of all 8 guns going at one time was as strong as a 150 truck going 60 miles an hour. Could turn over a locomotive, turn over a tank, and it was 23 seconds of bullets and all 9 yards. That's where all 9 yards came from. Thanks again, Paul.
Okay.
This is Paul Swope. We're here in front of the 1943 Sherman tank, made in the United States. These tanks, 1,600 plus, were refurbished at the Evansville Chrysler plant during World War II. This tank is now owned by the Evansville Wartime Museum, and they give rides twice a month, the first and third Thursday of the month. Paul Swope will talk about what he witnessed in World War II because he went to Wrights High School. He lived out here by the airport, and his bus took him down by Diamond and Stringtown, that's where the old North High School was, but behind the old North High was the Chrysler plant. The Chrysler plant was made in Evansville, was started in 1935, and made Chryslers here to 1959. During the war, they refurbished these tanks, they made bullets, and they made incendiary bombs. Tell us what you saw when you drove by that plant, Paul, because we don't have very many people telling us about things, about the track and about what you saw at behind the old Chrysler plant.
Well, they had a track that went all the way around the area there, where actually the area was where they made the bullets, the ordnance area. But
only 4 billion bullets made there. 4 billion bullets, 40 billion bullets were made in World War II. Made 10% of the bullets in World War II right there in that factory that you're talking about.
Yeah. And during the latter part of the war, they brought in these tanks to rebuild, and they took them down, every nut and bolt off of them, and rebuilt them, and went over them. They'd send, I know Mesker at the time I started working there, they were working on some of them. They had shipped the basic part of the tank in there on a flat car, and they'd add armor plate to them, welded to them. And I always thought, I was thought wrong, I always thought that those were tanks that were brought back from Germany. But later on I found out in reading different articles that they were tanks that were used in training. And they had to rebuild them, getting them ready for Japan is what they were doing. And I don't know, they worked on a bunch of them. I understand they took every nut and bolt loose and put them back together. I don't know if they put new engines in them or just overhauled the engines there. I really don't know about the engines.
The Chrysler engines, this one has a Ford engine, a little bit more efficient for us. Gas mileage is not very good on these tanks, but I think what I've seen in the records is that most of the tanks that were refurbished in Evansville were used for training in the United States. But I think there were some brought back from World War II in European theater to be repaired. 1,600 plus. Remember, in World War II, we made about 48,000 Shermans. We made a total of 100,000 tanks, 48,000 Shermans or so. So out of the 48,000, some of them didn't need repairs. So if we repaired 1,600, we probably repaired a fair amount that did require repairing. But you because you worked with Master Steel, you saw welding of this big steel. This thing's 67,000 pounds, 4 inches of steel on the front, and a lot of welding was needed to do in this tank with the 75 millimeter gun there. Can you tell us anything about the tank itself? Did you ever get close up when you were a kid? Did you ever see it run around that track? It was a mile and a quarter.
Yeah, we could see them running around the track as you go by there in the school bus. You could see them running around that track.
Were they going fast or slow?
Sometimes, as I understood it, they went around one way in the morning, and in the afternoon they went around the other way to make sure everything was okay.
A lot of dust behind them, but you'd see them as a
They
kid.
were asphalt tracks.
Was it? Yeah.
There was no dust or anything.
Nice. Yeah.
What I saw down at Mesker was the basic hull of it. Went after Chrysler took it all apart, they put the big heavy part on a flat car, send it down to Mesker and I guess other places, and they would be welding our extra armor plate on them.
Right on the train itself, so you'd have to take it off and on because it'd take a crane. This thing was so heavy. Did any of your other family members work at Chrysler? Do you remember anybody work at Chrysler, any of the plants?
I don't know anybody that worked there.
Uh-huh. How about the other plants? Any of your relatives work there?
I know at Chrysler they had to test them. Ever so many thousand bullets they made, they had to test them, the 45s. And my dad knew somebody that went over one time, let him fire some 45s through a Thompson submachine gun. So he thought that was something. I would have.
Yeah, the 45 bullets were made for essentially the Thompson submachine gun,
That's
the 45 pistol, and then one other gun in World War II used it. So it was really a used bullet. They made 96% of those bullets here in Evansville, and 3.2 billion were made now. So if you could make 100 bullets a minute, take it from the Revolutionary War till now to make all those bullets. If you stretch them end on end, it'd go around the world 3 times. So mostly the women in Evansville, and they had to change from brass to steel in a very short period of time because we ran out of brass during the war.
Yeah.
But you witnessed all that, didn't you?
Yeah, they shipped a lot of them out, and then where the 4-H grounds there now north of Evansville, they stored powder out there in bunkers, and they bring it into Evansville, I guess, as they need it and load it.
Brought it in by train, and then you'd see near 41, they would unload a lot of the gunpowder. They didn't want all the gunpowder to Chrysler site, so they would. It was a 6-mile conveyor belt. But also out there at 4-H Center, the bunkers, a lot of them are still there that you can see.
Yep, they're
stored
still
a
there.
lot of things there.
Yep.
But out those bunkers also, they had some incendiary bombs. In 1946, 45, they burnt a lot of phosphorus there, and it was like a fireworks there because we built incendiary bombs to burn down Japan, which happened between January and May of 45, but they still wouldn't give up. But some of those incendiary bombs were built here in Evansville. But to get rid of them, they burnt a lot of them in 1945, 46 up by the fairgrounds up there.
Yeah.
You didn't see that when they
I
burned
didn't
them.
see any of that. So.
Yeah. Did you ever watch any of the assembly of the LST downtown? Did you ever get down there?
Oh, yeah.
If you're at Wrights High School, you could see it from your school. Tell us about that.
The parking lot was up on the hill there, and if anybody was having a particular person launch a boat or a boat that was going to be famous for the number or something, why they'd let us out and we'd go down there on the parking lot and watch them launch it.
So you watched some of those ships go down in the water?
Oh yeah. Of course they didn't launch them like they show on TV.
It was real slow.
It was like watching the grass grow. They lowered them with winches and were sideways down on the water.
Not on banana peels?
No.
Yeah. Well, you were a kid, you got to watch it from Wright's Bowl, or Wright's Hill, the parking lot, so you really got to see a lot. You probably watched 10 of them get christened or something, maybe.
I don't know how many I watched, but there was a bunch of them I saw launched.
And then they put them, it took them up to 46 days to build, but then they outfitted them, so they put them next to caissons all up and down the river by Seagull there. So you saw them put two LSTs together, and what they would do is outfit them there, put the bunks in them and put all the inside. Yeah. You saw all that along the river.
All the trim.
Yeah, the trim.
Yeah, what you'd call a trim, I guess.
Took a while to do that, another 10, 20 days. Now, did you see all those cranes? Everything went by hand signal. You see there were 12 cranes. There's one crane left down there.
Big old cranes.
12 of them to carry all the things to help move things for that LST plant.
A lot of the LST was prefabricated around town, around Evansville. They'd bring them down there on trucks and lift them up and weld them all together.
Yeah, the stern of the ship, you can see they put the stern of the ship on the back of two pickup trucks and the front on the back of the other, and one would have to back up all the way to the LST plant, and one would go forward. But there's a big part of the ship that would weld either Mesker or U.S. Steel or International Steel.
International did a lot too.
Yeah, both of them did that. So that's why we got some of these contracts. We had two steel companies here. We had the river. We had trains. We had good highway. We had airports. So a lot of these contracts, remember 80,000 people, the biggest for the war effort in the world, 80,000 out of 120,000. So the highest per capita population worked for the war effort in the United States. And you got to witness that as a young kid.
As I remember too, the story goes, a lot of these people that would come into Evansville to work in these war plants, they'd do what they call hotbed. They'd one guy sleep in the bed during the day and another guy sleep in it during the night. And they'd work it the other way around.
Yeah, my grandparents had a house and they would have an extra bedroom, so a hotbed that bed wasn't even cool by the time the other person jumped in. That's why they called it hotbed, because the influx of 60,000 new workers here, they had to carpool and they had to go by bus, and they had to hotbed them because they'd stay all week. Someone go home on the weekends, but how could any society absorb double to time and a half their population within a year period of time? Our population increased from 1930-40 census up to 43 by close to 60,000 new workers, 18,000 industrial workers prior to the war, 80,000 during the war. So everything was bursting at the seams, not just in Evansville, but other places across the country. But Evansville should be proud of its heritage of what they accomplished. And you were right in the middle of it. You saw all kinds of stuff, and your uncle was involved in the modification center. Your dad helped get the groceries for all those troops up there in McCutcheonville.
Right.
Any other comments you have there, Paul?
I can't really think of anything right offhand.
Yeah.
The Evansville, all these factories ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there was enough people here to do it.
24/7, and you could see the LST plant from halfway across the whole city because it was lit up all night long. You just saw lights everywhere. And Faultless Casters here, we had 80 different plants, made 330 different products, and it was 24/7 at most of the plants.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, thanks again, Paul.